listening to a Tax Justice Network podcast covering the 10 worst global offenders identified by the Financial Secrecy Index in 2018. In 7th place is Germany, with a secrecy score of 59.10 out of 100 and over 5% of the global market. I'm Naomi Fowler, talking to Tax Justice Network Germany's Sarah Goddard. Germany, it doesn't have a particularly high secrecy score, but it's got over 5% of the global market for offshore financial services. What's important to note in particular in this year's ranking, do you think?
I guess many people would be surprised to find Germany so high on this index, but actually we should note that as it is an attractive location for international investment, this also comes with a high responsibility because even minor loopholes can have a major impact. So I think that's very important to note about the index in general. And I think that there are still loopholes that lead to a situation where the financial actors don't really control or don't do enough to provide transparency about whose money is invested here and make sure that the money doesn't have illicit origins such as tax avoidance or evasion in other countries or money related to money laundering or corruption. And I think there's still not enough done in Germany to make sure that this doesn't happen or to provide transparency about it.
According to the Financial Secrecy Index researchers, Germany has been quite ambiguous about introducing public country-by-country reporting so that we know the breakdown of where different multinational companies are doing business and how many staff they employ, what the genuine substance is of their business that they do in each jurisdiction. Why do you think that is?
Well, that was really a pity last year that there couldn't be any progress on this in Germany. I think the government was split on the question, so the Ministry of Justice, led by Social Democrats, was rather in favor, and I think the Conservatives leading the Ministry of Finance were against it, so they couldn't agree on a common strategy. And I think, several arguments have been brought forward, but I think the most important is that basically the Ministry of Finance fears that secrets of German companies could be revealed and it would weaken the German economy if companies were forced to publish certain numbers. But actually no really good example has been brought up. So we think it's kind of a straw argument also.
Right, and Germany also opposed public registers of the real owners of companies, even though it did implement a register of beneficial ownership for companies and trusts under the Fourth Anti-Money Laundering Directive, but that register fails to provide true transparency. So again, it's been opposing a public register.
Yeah, I think here the situation is similar, that the German government was very fond of tax confidentiality, and I think the main idea is that, the public authorities should deal with these issues and the public should not be involved too much. And I think that's a mistake because the past has shown that the tax authorities or also financial intelligence units are not well equipped to do their job. And this is why we don't really trust the government when they say, we don't need this information to be public because it's sufficient if the authorities get the information because they will do their job.
And yet the public nature is what's so important, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the scandals of the past have revealed that the work of investigative journalists and of civil society was really important to bring up information. And I think the German government should honor these activities a little more and also admit that there have been failures and that the authorities have not done their job very well all the time. I think even the story about ownership of making the beneficial owners public, even the most ridiculous arguments have been raised to protect confidentiality of investors. And I think as a society we have the right to know who's investing, and the people should also be able to take people into account for the business that they do.
Right. And another thing that Germany opposed was the unilateral automatic reporting of tax information to developing countries. Well, this was something that affected developing countries in particular because Germany has been insisting on reciprocal exchange, even though if you really think about it, it's very unlikely that, in some of the poorer countries in the world that Germans will be hiding their money there. So why do you think Germany is taking that position?
Well, of course, officially it's always argued that if the other tax authority is not sufficiently equipped and confidentiality of the data cannot be guaranteed. But I think it's also a problem of the general problem that we have here, that Germany is keen to attract foreign investments or investment from foreigners, but doesn't really want to take a responsibility in where this money comes from, what are the origins of that money. So I think this is one of the main problems.
I want to ask you about the ban that Germany has put in place on newly issued bearer shares. This is a new financial secrecy indicator that countries have been assessed on this time for the index. Although Germany has banned newly issued bearer shares, unregistered bearer shares continue to exist in Germany. I'm wondering if you can explain what these are and why it matters.
It's basically a form of allowing investors to hold shares of companies without having their name mentioned in the contract. It allows people to trade their shares in an anonymous way. And of course, it's very good that newly issued bearer shares will be banned in the future. But still the question arises why they don't ban already existing bearer shares. It's just not clear to me why doing business should be allowed in this anonymous way.
If we look at actual tax collection processes and enforcement in Germany, it's very weak, according to the Financial Secrecy Index researchers. That's another quite a big surprise about Germany.
Yeah, I think many people wouldn't expect this from Germany, but as the tax administration is left to the regional governments, or mainly, I think the biggest problem is that staff policy is left to the regional governments. So the federal government doesn't have any binding standards on staffing of the local tax administrations. And this has produced a situation of understaffing in many regions. So the service sector's trade union has reported important staff shortages in tax investigation, but also in auditing. And the number of audits in the corporate sector remains low. And it's not really clear how the government will improve this if they don't provide any binding standards to the regional governments. And even the suspicion has arose that the regions use this as a type of hidden tax competition by not enforcing the tax laws that are actually in place. Yeah, I think this is a general problem that we have here, that the public sector has been downsized over the last decades, and it's not only a problem of tax administrations and financial intelligence units, it's all over the public sector that we suffer from staff shortages and that public authorities are not able to do their job anymore in a satisfying manner.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We've seen cuts around the world, everywhere, I believe, except Canada in that area. And finally, I wanted to ask, in terms of criminal offences in Germany, it's a big surprise that major tax evasion is not a predicate crime for money laundering purposes. And this kind of implies banks can easily accept money coming from tax evasion, especially if that offence is committed abroad. Another big surprise about Germany.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the same problem that the authorities are not really held responsible of where the money comes from. So as long as the money is invested here in a normal business environment, there is no motivation or not enough motivation maybe to find out where it comes from. And this is a general issue here, that it was a long time people thought that something like money laundering would only exist in other countries, maybe Russia or Italy, and that it wasn't a problem of Germany. But the investigations of the last years have revealed that there are considerable money laundering activities in Germany, but that there's not enough done to prevent it. And the question is there really a political will to prevent it or not? I'm not so sure about it.
Right, well, that's the big question. And do you think that German people would be surprised to see their country at number 7 in the Financial Secrecy Index in 2018?
Well, I think there might be some surprise, but still the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers have also surprised many people, and I think the atmosphere has changed a bit, so the trust in the public authorities has suffered a bit, I would say.
And what are your hopes for the next few years in terms of what Germany might do to improve this situation?
I can only hope that I've seen a lot of people being upset about the situation, but still it hasn't really transformed into major protests. So I think the government itself will not be the first fighter for tax justice and transparency. So I think it must be something demanded by movements, by the people, and we have to push them to adopt reforms. So I would maybe hope that anger or the doubts that people have about what has been going on also transform into protest, more pressure towards the future government. I think the last years were in a way really a bit disappointing because everybody talks about fighting tax evasion, tax avoidance, and then a lot of important initiatives have been brought up and then many times have been watered down again by the lobbies and by conservatives. And I think this is really something that is not really revealed to the public sometimes because it seems that a solution has been adopted. But then when you look into the details, it doesn't really solve the problem. So I think civil society, we still have a lot to do in the future.